Hello everyone, we have Sanjay here from the IDAM team. Sanjay, you can start with your session.
Yeah, so good afternoon everyone. So today we are going to talk about this talk. This tech talk is regarding, we're going to talk about CI/CD, its best practices, how we can give a regression free or a bug free code in production. Later on, we'll also talk about the data migration framework and reconciliation framework. And whenever anybody wants to migrate the whole data from a source system to target system, we have developed a framework which can be utilized by any of the teams, and we'll tell you what are the process for use data set migration. And later on in this tech talk, I will also going to cover Cassandra. What is its core important features? Why we have choose Cassandra? What is the strength of Cassandra? And what are the common problems, common pitfall mistakes will people do while configuring Cassandra in development or in a production environment, right? So, yeah. So I'm just going to start a brief introduction of an identity platform overview. So identity platform overview is core authentication, is a centralized authentication and authorization platform for whole Geo, and we have around 80 plus services spread across different IDAM platforms and different IDAM components, and these components these APIs are consumed by mostly all of the Geo applications. Mostly you are also aware of various of your applications which you are working, you are using IDAM services. So I'm just not explaining much about these services because this tech talk is regarding the other part. So just giving a brief overview of an IDAM platform services. Right. So going to a technology stack, like these are the core technology stack which is showing in your screen, and this is the core technology stack we are working on our day-to-day life. All developers are well acquainted in my team with this technology stack, and rather very much core technology stack, but I just shown a brief of what are the core technology stack we are using to build our system. Yeah, so let's start with CI/CD, which stands for a continuous integration and continuous delivery or deployment terminology. So before diving into continuous integration, I just wanted to tell that it is very hot topic in today's industry, especially when we talk about DevOps. But why it came? Like let's discuss about that a little bit. Let's sort of a 5 years or a few years back scenario. When there is a waterfall model and a customer or a consumer or a client gives us a requirement to build a project. So what we do is like we tell that client, okay, we'll deliver that project in 5 months or a 1 year or a 2 years time. And later on, once it was there, we went at the time of delivery. The client was really unhappy because at that time he sees that there is a lot of requirement has changed or the technology has changed, and whatever has been discussed is not delivered or things like that. And at that time, because there is no continuous feedback involved, from the client, from the customer. So to solve this problem, there is a methodology called Agile came in the technology. Agile came in the industry, and using Agile, you can deliver a workable product in a two weeks or a 1 week scenario. So we can. It's not mandatory to deliver the whole production code, but it is basically to deliver a few features where client can see this is the thing which we wanted to. This is the thing we have developed, and it is in line with the client or a customer need. So they are happy because there is a continuous feedback involved in Agile methodology. Yeah. So this is one part, and another part, like if you are working on some project, say, and this project have several modules, and you have given that modules to your developers. Developers are working on a separate modules, and each module they are very much happy. They got the modules. For example, they are working on a Java. They will write the Java code. They will write the JUnit test cases supporting Java code. If they are working on Node.js, they will write a Node.js code according to the module, and they will write a super test or Chai Mocha test cases to support the Node.js code. So there is a JUnit test cases or super test test cases associated with your code, and it's working fine. They're very much happy that my code is working fine, my module is working fine, but they are not aware how it will behave when all the modules come together and integrate in a project, because they have not tested in that manner, because this type of testing is missing. So that is called as an integration testing. Like when all the modules independently tested by developers is happy when it come together, built in a project, and in that project the issues came like integration issues, or because there is an automated test cases or an integration test cases missing in that part. So who is responsible for that, and who is going to solve this problem? So to solve this problem, there is a term called a continuous integration. So how the continuous integration helps is, the continuous integration says that whenever you write a code, you commit it in the shared repository. So once you commit in the shared repository, it will ready for a delivery pipeline. So you can have a various checkpoints in the delivery, and you can have a various stages in delivery, so that you can be ready for a continuous deployment. So continuous integration says that whenever you write a test case, you write a code, you commit it in the shared repository. So all codes, whenever it is committed in the shared repository, there is an automated test case, the scenarios which will run through a pipeline in a continuous integration, in a continuous delivery way, and later on it will be ready for a continuous deployment. So there is a two terms like continuous delivery and continuous deployments. These two things are actually different, but people normally often mix these two things. So continuous delivery is a process which is when you're keeping your code ready for deployment. So delivery may have many stages. Like once the all code is committed to your shared repository, once you commit it, the integration test cases, unit tests you already done locally. Once you committed, the integration test case will be triggered. Once the integration test case is passed, you will pass it through various, performance test, endurance test, stress test, spikes test. You can define various ways in this pipeline. So there are tools available to define that pipelines, like Azure is one of them, Jenkins is one of them, is built together where you can define the whole delivery pipeline. So once you're ready with your delivery, once all the delivery pipelines is executed, now we can say that our code is ready for deployment. Because you have enough tested it, like you have done enough performance test on it, you have done endurance test on it, you have done a functional test, integration test, and obviously unit test. So this all together, and this gives confidence to any of the teams, like teams, delivery managers, operation guys, anybody has a given, this is a confidence to them that this code will 100% is workable in any of the environments, either in SIT, replica, or in production, without having any, it's 100% company code. We can say that. Many companies don't do a continuous deployment in production, because also we as Geo also we don't believe on continuous deployment in production. But yes, we have, because we have various environments before production to put your code. But we in an IDEM team, we follow heavily continuous integration, delivery, and deployment on our local environments, where we're able to do a performance test, endurance test, functional test, integration test, JUnit test on each and every commit which is developer is doing. Right. So continuous integration, delivery, and deployment, and continuous testing is involved. Yeah. So in this area, I just wanted to explain that you can anyway more or less more things to be involved in the pipeline. So how do we do it? Whenever developer commits a code, we have a Swagger hub where all the APIs are exposed. Obviously, this we have developed. And whenever the local code is the developer is ready with the code, we have attached an ESLint, which is attached to their development tools. And ESLint is basically your static code review. So ESLint, what it will do, it has whenever you write any code, we have defined some rules in the ESLint. It is specially for Node.js, where you have defined some rules like unused variables or missing return statements, or you defined a method which is not being called by any of the Node.js classes or any of the Java classes. So these rules will be defined, and it do a static code review. So once the static code review is passed, developer is doing a code coverage. So Istanbul is used for code coverage. So whatever the JUnit test cases you have written in your for your module, this code coverage is enough whether this JUnit test cases are enough where all the lines of your code is getting executed with this test case. If it is not enough, developer writes more test cases to make it more than 85% or 90% of your coverage. This is our view. Once this is done, it will be a part of your CI pipeline. We'll have various build tools to make it available on the CI. Then we'll have a functional test. We used Apache JMeter, Node.js, Chai, Mocha, Awesome, or Super Test to have it an integration test cases. We'll have load testing. We'll do performance testing, endurance testing, stress testing, spike testing on a daily basis. Once it is done, we in the morning we'll get a report. In the morning or whenever it is developed, we have an automation created an in-house automation UI where you can see all these things on every commit of your developer. Currently, we have set up it on nightly build, but we're planning to have it on a commit basis. So you can see on a monitor that, okay, you see the UI, everything is working fine, and it gives anybody a confidence that everything is working fine, and we can anytime we can deploy it even in production, but we can deploy it in a SIT replica, and then we'll go through a organization-wide definition like SIT replica and then production. Right. Yeah. So this is the place where I just wanted to explain you the pipeline definition, what we have defined in Jenkins. So whenever a code is locally reviewed, static code review is done, your code coverage is done, you push a code in your Git repository where you can do a manual review, where the reviewers will do a manual review. If it is approved, it will be pushed in the Git shared repository. Otherwise, it will be again go back to the developer is again working on the review part. Once it is available in the Git repository, it will be part of your whole pipeline. So Jenkins will build and deploy, do a testing on it, execute all the test cases which I just explained, like integration test cases, functional test cases, do a performance testing on it, generate a performance report, generate a test report, and all these results are getting stored in MongoDB, where it is presentable in IDAM automation UI. So I just wanted to give a demo on automation UI where you can see whatever I'm just saying is available on daily basis. So is my screen visible? Is this UI is visible? Is it visible?
What are you trying to show, Sanjeev?
Yeah. This is visible?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So this is an automation UI which we have created. Like this is for this is from a developer shared repository which we called as a trunk branch. So whatever I just explained, for example, whenever developer commits any code and it is available for it is executed whole delivery pipeline and it is deployed in our lower environments, like it's local environment. So these are the test cases, like 2000 test cases we run on the daily basis. You can see like the fourth date, on the third date, it was on daily basis we run it. So it gives like a confidence that all the test cases for all the, we have divided a project in our phases. So 2000 test cases where 2036 is passed, 17 has failed, the percentage criteria is 99.7%, and this is the details of these 17 test cases which was failed. Okay, you can see where it got failed. You can go and correct those if it is impacting the regression or it is having a regression. And yes, so it is available for all the test cases. Around 8,000 test cases we execute. We have written and make it a part of CI pipeline. So we don't need to basically do a manual test on daily basis. It's an automated completely. once it is done, like we have some integration test cases where all the modules come together, and these integration test cases we have written some integration test cases, like all the applications was integrated with IDAM. Similarly, we have created some integration test cases, and it will be tested in the CI pipeline. So again, this has around 3,000 test cases where it got executed. So in this CI pipeline, again, there is a performance test we do on daily basis. So this performance test, like we put a load on each of the APIs. I'm showing just you today's results, how it was run. Like these are the all APIs which we have it. We'll integrating more and more services on daily basis. But yes, this is the API name where this is the concurrency which we have run on this test case. This is the response time which we'll get. This is the benchmark which we'll get in the example. We have some benchmark set. This is the transactions per second hit on this API. And in that way, if you have some errors, you will get the error count. Okay, why it got failed? You can even see here how many 400s, how many 500s, and 502. If you click on any of the API, it will give a detailed report of it, like where it got failed, what was the load you have pushed in this API, and similar like that. You will get a proper graphs of EPS. We have integrated perfmon, JMeter perfmon. So we will see all the we'll see the error count, how many is a 200, how many is a 400, how it got failed, and based on analysis you can get, okay, this is a 400, a bad request side type of scenario, so you can go and see. So this all PT has been run. You will get a PT summary exposed over, we have used Elastic Search for it, Kibana dashboard to present it here. You can see, okay, these are the APIs which will run with this average TPS. Right. You can see environment health, like these are our lower environments, these are our build server, CI server, this is all our internal functional testing environment, this is our performance environment. So yes, so we'll see the health of the environment on daily basis, and similar like for other setups of IDAM, like GeoMoney, GeoMoney performance, PT, and you can see code coverage also, like whatever the code is written, and then whatever the JUnit test cases developer has written is enough covered the test cases. You can open it, any of the class file, you can see, okay, this is the coverage of the code. Anything which is written in red, it means that that part is not covered in the code coverage. So developer has to write enough test cases to pass this code, to execute this code also. So it gives us, okay, everything is covered. We also integrated some of the technical specification documents on the UI. So you can go and see, okay, anybody can go and see what are the classes, what are the method definitions they have. Similar like a Java doc, we have created our own API documentation, which is available on the shared repository. Right. So with this automation UI, we'll get enough confidence that this whole pipeline has been executed and we are ready for deployment even in production. So in that way, we can say that we are regression free or zero bug in our code. Similar way, because we are working on a trunk, so this is the latest branch where developers are working on. But it can have, it is not dependent on the features or any defects coming from higher environments, or business has given some features which we are working on. A lot of things which we itself will work on to improve our code. Like for example, if you are a Node.js developer, you are working on some callback scenarios, you wanted to improve it to promises. Later on, you want to improve it to async await. So these all improvements on day-to-day basis we do in our code, and this is not coming from any business. So trunk code is always one level upper than any of the other environments, like in SID. So we do an automation on SID branch itself, because if anything is coming from SID, we also make sure that the SID code base, which is like X minus 1, X is your trunk branch and SID is always minus 1 from the trunk. So from the developer branch. So the SID branch is, so we all wanted to ensure that everything is working in SID branch also. So we run all the integration test cases, functional integration test cases, even in SID branch, which will make sure that whatever the defect or features which SID or business wants, we wanted to deliver it in SID, so we can deliver it in SID branch and run the test cases in the SID itself. So it will also ensure that nothing will break, nothing is going to break. Right. So this is all about the how IDAM has used CI/CD with automation test cases and integration test cases for Libby. This is the first part of this tech talk. Later on, I just wanted to start data migration. So data migration simply says that you wanted to migrate your huge amount of data from any of the source system to target system. So you wanted to extract, transform, and load the data into the target system. There are so many companies like SAP, Oracle are providing their product for data migration, which is huge costly. And so we have migrated our whole data from Oracle to Cassandra. So we have thought of to make it as a framework, which can be available for any of the teams in Jio who wanted looking for a huge data migration. So we are working on a product where it can be migrated from currently it is supported from Oracle/OID to Cassandra, where it is exposed over some configuration file. You can define your schema over the configurations files, and rest all is abstract. Rest all is abstract to you, and it will behind the scenes once you define a proper configuration files, it will start your data migration process. So more or less in any of the product of data migration, if you see, there are common phases like analysis and discovery, extract, cleans, validate, load, and then reconcile. So we also followed the same industry standard process for data migration, which we have divided into various phases of data migration, and in any of the phase, if it has any of the phase it got failed, it will basically execute and store the results in a proper exception queues, where you can again look at the exception queues and find out where it got failed, and you can clean that data and repush in the queue for data migration. So this all process we have developed as a framework. We are working on a product called Data Migration Reconcile, where we wanted to achieve it for many source systems. Like we are working on MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle. If we want to migrate those data from these databases to Cassandra or any other NoSQL database currently supported Cassandra, we are working to any, but currently it is supported in Cassandra, so you can able to migrate those data using our framework. Yeah, so these are the phases I just explained, like extract, cleans, validate, load, and reconcile later on. So reconcile is a process where you wanted to match your data, whatever you have migrated from system A to system B, target source system to target system, for example, Oracle to Cassandra. You define your schema in Cassandra, you define your schema of Oracle where you are migrating. You want what you wanted to match, like you wanted to match attribute by attribute, row by row. Is my whole data is migrated successfully or not? Is my whole data is reconciled or not? So this tool, this framework we have developed again to check two systems, source 1 and source 2, will provide it to our process models which we have developed. We have developed whole algorithms of reconciliation where these two databases will be matched, their data will be matched and produce a summary report out of it. The summary report is pretty much readable format, like which attribute has which data and which was missed. So you can see, okay, this data is not properly migrated. You can again want to migrate, and there's a process to push that data again in the queue, where it will be again part of your data migration, and you can migrate those data. So through this reconciliation, you will get 100% confidence that okay, my whole data is completely migrated from a source system to target system. Right, and this is a kind of a framework which we have developed. It can be extensible to any of the teams in Jio who wanted to do such type of migration and reconciliation from. If they're looking for migration from RDBMS to NoSQL, yes, you can use anyway this tool for your purpose. Right, so yeah, so in migration, like we have heavily used Cassandra, I can say in Jio. So why we have used Cassandra, what is Apache Cassandra, what are the best practices of Apache Cassandra, and what are the common mistakes people do while developing, working on Cassandra in production environment. So I will just make you aware with the core most important technical features of Cassandra, which will help you to take a decision if you wanted to looking for Apache Cassandra as a NoSQL database for your teams. Like, Okay, so after this session, you will able to know you are able to wanted to work on Cassandra, or you wanted to take Cassandra as your target database in near migration. So Cassandra is a NoSQL database. Obviously, I think everybody knows about that. It's massively scalable, distributed database. It's written in Java. Developers from Amazon Dynamo or Google Bigtable came together, joined Facebook, and Facebook has developed Cassandra. They have used in their inbox search first, and later on it got picked up because these two systems, so the base systems are Google Bigtables and Apache Dynamo, and they developed Cassandra. It's a masterless architecture. It's not a master-slave architecture. So each node has the same responsibility. So we can say it's a no single point of failure because there is no master. Every node is same in Cassandra. So it's highly distributed in nature. It's a data center or a rack aware. So you can make Cassandra data center aware or a rack aware. Whenever any of the data center goes down, even your Cassandra works. When any of the rack goes down, your Cassandra is up. If any of the local system goes down, your Cassandra is up. So it's highly available and distributed in nature. It is a predictable scaling. So it is a linearly scalable database. You want it because you know it's a vertical scalable system. So if you have 3 node cluster in production and suddenly there is a load increase, you can at that time decide, okay, I need to go and increase scale my Cassandra so you can add more nodes to it, so that your scalability and transactions per second will TPS and response will increase in Cassandra. So your transactions will automatically get handled in Cassandra because it's a linearly scalable system. It's high performance, yes. It's a tunable consistency. Why we call as a tunable consistency, I will let you know, because you can tune the consistency based on your requirement. Whenever you write anything Cassandra, whenever you read anything Cassandra, you can tune its consistency. If you want 100% consistent data, this is not a database for you, because you need to balance between the consistency and availability in Cassandra. It's a SQL language, like it's very similar to SQL language. Those who are working on RDBMS, the projects who are working on RDBMS are aware of SQL. So SQL is very much similar to SQL, and you will see a similar type of queries executed in Cassandra also. Right? So why Apache Cassandra and Consumer Identity Platform? Why we have used Cassandra and no other data store in Cassandra? So to answer this question, like Cassandra is a wide column store. Like it's basically a columnar database. It's not a row oriented. It's not a key value pair database. It's not a graph DB, or it's not basically a document based. So it's a column store database. Means all the column families work together. Column families, wherever the data is stored, is assigned to a key, and which keys act as a partition key in Cassandra. And so it can support as many as columns. So Cassandra can store up 2 billion columns per storage row. That is why it's a column store database, and we have a requirement of 5 column store. That is why we have used Cassandra, and no other database is supporting this feature. And IDAM is Identity Access Manager Platform is also planning for a data distribution across multiple DCs. So we need a system which is highly available, because we can't say that okay, IDAM is down for 15 minutes because more than 60-70 applications are integrated with IDAM. IDAM should be highly available in nature. So, and this Cassandra is ideal because previously Cassandra we have Oracle, which is a single point of failure. If Oracle DB is down, then whole system has to be suffer, and our teams has to be suffer that this is down for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But we don't want such type of thing. So we have choose Cassandra, which is highly available design. If any node goes down in Cassandra, obviously the part of the users which are residing in that node will get impacted, but across other nodes which has the data will not get impacted, and it will be available always. So yeah, so Cassandra is mainly because Cassandra works perfectly, because you need to know the internal working of Cassandra, then only you can choose Cassandra, because Cassandra always says that in its document that you design your queries first, you design your data model first, and then you choose a Cassandra which is a better choice for you or not. So if you are able to design your queries based on Cassandra requirement, if you design your data model based on Cassandra requirement, then Cassandra is a best fit for you, and it will give you a best performance in the industry. So So data modeling, yes, we have done a lot data modeling in Cassandra, and we always search on a partition keys. Cassandra always recommends search on a partition keys because partition keys are global in nature, and Cassandra knows that when you search on a partition key, any of the key, for example, you wanted to search on a mobile number, if you wanted to search a record, get a record from a mobile number, and mobile number is a part of a partition key, then Cassandra knows that this record resides in which node in the whole cluster, and it directly hits that node and get the data. So data modeling and query designing is most important in Cassandra. If you not design a query well, Cassandra will hamper a lot, and you will say Cassandra is a bad database for you. It has a feature like write exceeds read. If you have if in your project, if write exceeds read, mainly Cassandra is very good in write performance rather than in read performance, because write is very fast in Cassandra. So we have such type of requirements, so we have used Cassandra. Read should always be through a primary key, oblique partition key, both are same in nature in Cassandra. Yes. Yes, so consistent hashing, the second most important feature of Cassandra internal, when I see Cassandra internal documentations, I see it uses a consistent hashing. So most of you who has worked on Java knows about hashing. Like what is a hashing? Hashing is like whenever you feed any of the key to it, there is a hash function associated. Hash function gives you a random value. For example, if you wanted to search Sanjay associated in the database, so when you feed Sanjay in the hash function gives some random value, say very long value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in hashing in Java, whatever other technology uses, when you hash it, it gives a number. But if you have a server location, say you have 15 nodes where you are going to store this value, or you wanted to search this value 15 servers, so this hash value has to find the server location or a bucket location where to store. So this hash value has to do, because this whole big number is not available in memory. You have only 18 servers, and 18 servers are available. Your 18 bucket locations are available where you wanted to store 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hash data. So how do you do that in normal hashing? What you do is you can do a modulo operator with your 18 servers, and you do a modulo operation with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modulus of 18. You will get some bucket location like 3 or 4, and at that position you will store that key, and you will store the value of that key. In that way the hashing works. But the problem with normal hashing, why Cassandra has not used hashing? Cassandra is completely, you can think of Cassandra as a big hash map, because Cassandra works on hashing a lot in internal. Why it has not used a normal hashing? Because whenever you are normal hashing, there is a problem of rehashing. For example, say any of the which I just explained, like if you have 10 servers available in production, and you get a hash of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modulo by 10, you will get some number 3 or 4. You will store the data into 3 or 4. Say for example, if any of the server goes down in production, and apart from now 10, you will have 9. So whenever the key comes, again the same value for Sanjay, if you wanted to search, then it will generate because hashing always generates the same value. There's the funda of hashing that it generates the same hash code always associated with the key. So whenever again wanted to search a Sanjay, you feed it to the hash function gives a value again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in that, now the time, because one server is down, you would do a modulo operator with 9 servers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modulus by 9, you will get another location where the data is not there. So at that time, the hashing fails, and at that time, the whole rehashing has to be done on all the servers, which is a bit costly operation for any of the databases where rehashing is involved. And in Cassandra, there is no rehashing is involved. That is why it is a consistent hashing. It basically how it does. It basically uses a token range for all of the nodes. So whenever you wanted to search for any of the key, it defines a range of all the nodes. So if you have a 10 node cluster in production, it defines 0 to 1 node. So the first node will store the token range from 0 to 2000. The second node will store the token from 2000 to 4000. The third node will store the token range from 4000 to 6000. In that way, the whole ring is divided into the number of tokens. And Cassandra supports minus 2 to the power 63 to 2 to the power 63 token ranges, which will cover all the hash functions. Right now, the latest hash function also generates within this range. So in that way, if you get a token range, you will again, if you wanted to search for a key, you generate some hash code. There is no modulo operation right now. So it sees, okay, this number is available in which token range, and it will directly store the value in that node. So there is no rehashing, because if any node goes down again, you will get the same value in the same node, and the rehashing need not to be done. That is why Cassandra is very fast in nature, because it doesn't do a rehashing, and that is a consistent hashing algorithm. A lot of the other databases, Redis and other NoSQL databases also use consistent hashing, and this is the best algorithm people are using. And yeah, there is no needs of joins and aggregates. If you don't have any needs of joins and aggregates, you can use Cassandra very well. If you have this requirement, Cassandra is not well suited for you. Query language has already explained. And wrong usage of Cassandra, if you have basically a multiple access paths to your table. For example, if you have a table of 10 columns and you in your current database, you are able to search on 8 columns on your table and your 10 column tables. And these all 8 columns are indexed, but it's not a primary key, but it's an index, and you wanted to search on all the 8 columns. In such type of scenario, Cassandra would not be good for you, because you wanted to have a search always on a partition key. That is mandatory in Cassandra for performance reasons. So this is the reason that we have why we have used Cassandra for consumer, because we are able to answer all these things, and we are able to suffice that Cassandra is best suited for identity and access management platform. So that we have used Cassandra. Before jumping into Cassandra, we got to know that these things, and so that we use Cassandra for identity, and it is performing very well in our platform. So I just wanted to make you aware that what are the important terminologies of Cassandra, which we have used, like cluster. So Cassandra starts with a cluster. Cluster is just a ring of nodes. So whenever you have nodes, you can define in a cluster. So it will basically a ring. Node is an instance in Cassandra. A single instance of Cassandra is a node. Replication factor means that just say that how many copies of your data you wanted to keep. Like for example, I just said it's a tunable consistent. So if any of the node is down, if you keep one copy and that node goes down, you will not get the data. So Cassandra says that you can keep a copies of data in any of the nodes. So it is defined by replication factor in Cassandra. Key space is like a database. Column family, which I just explained, it's a columnar database. So all the column are associated in the column families, ordered by some value, and then associated with the key, partition key. Mem table is an in-memory database of Cassandra, where wherever whatever you wanted to write or read, it is available in the in-memory. And if it is not available, then it will go and search in the disk. Otherwise, it will return from the in-memory table. So SS tables are which is an immutable sorted string table. It is a string, so called as immutable in nature. Immutable means whenever any changes occurred in any table, any new data has to be inserted in disk. So it will create a new SS table to store that. It will not append or it will not update the old SS table. So SS tables are the data files which is available over the disk. Once the mem table is flushed, so it will be all the data will be get stored in the SS table over the disk. It is permanently available. So SS in the disk, you will see always when you use Cassandra, you will see 3 type of files available in your disk, like a blue filter file, index file, and a data file. I will tell you what is a blue filter. So you will get an index file which is associated to that SS table, data files where the data is residing, and the blue filter files on the disk. Right. So you just remember that this is an immutable file. Primary index, it's a part of SS table where you wanted to search which SS table has the data. Using that primary index, you can search which SS table has contained my data wherever I want to go for any search or for a particular key. Primary key in Cassandra is a partition key, which I just explained. If you have multiple primary keys in your table, you can also make it as a partition key, or you can make it as a clustering key in Cassandra. For example, in your database, if you have 5 columns where you wanted to search, which is acting as a primary key in your RDBMS, yes, you can very well make all 5 keys as a partition key in Cassandra, or you can make 1 key as a partition key, or rest all keys as a clustering keys in Cassandra. Bloom filters are latest data structure. Bloom filter is a very good data structure across many DBs, many NoSQL, NeoDBs, Google Bigtable, and all these using a Bloom filters. Bloom filter is a data structure which is a probabilistic data structure, which is basically help us to search which node has the data or not. So Cassandra uses Bloom filter internally, and Bloom filter the main part of Bloom filter is like this is a separate session where Bloom filter has to be explained, but I just wanted to give you. It stores the data in a binary format in Bloom filters, so in a 1-0 format. So imagine Bloom filter is if you wanted, if there is a hash table basically requires a lot of space, or hash map requires a lot of space over the disk. But Bloom filter is designed in a way that it only stores the binary value of the data. So according to Bloom filter documents, like it can store about 100 million records in just 100 MB. So it is a very fast, or very less. It is keeping a very less storage in memory, and it will give you a probabilistic search that where you will get that data in which node. So Cassandra uses internally Bloom filters. Secondary indexes are the local indexes which is associated with each of the node. Like each node, which for example, there is a 10 node cluster in production, each node having some data. So to search local data in a node, so secondary indexes are associated with the other columns on the table which stores locally, but it is not a global index, and it is not associated with the partition key. It has a replication strategy in Cassandra, a simple strategy for a network topology strategy. So if you wanted to see Cassandra, if you wanted to work on a multi-DC kind of architecture, where you wanted to create a clusters across DCs, then you use a network topology strategy, because network topology is used for DC type of nature, and simple strategy when this is a local DC you have, like if you have only on the local set of cluster, then you can use a simple strategy. It's just an application strategy. Consistency level, I just explained you, like it has a tunable consistency, so you can tune it for reads and write. So it has a consistency level, like various consistency levels, so you can put as per your requirement. Partitioner, yes, it uses a partitioner to decide which node stores which data. I just explained, like using in the previous slides, I just explained using consistent hashing. It uses a Murmur3 partitioner default as a default in Cassandra, which tells you, okay, this node has to be decided based on the token range, which node has to store the data. And tokens are the hash value assigned to nodes. So I just explained that minus 2 to the power 63 to 2 to the power 63 token range is available in Cassandra, and so you can these nodes are divided into these tokens. All right, so I think I will explain all the important terminologies, why we have used it, what is Cassandra. This is basically deployment models of Cassandra in production or locally. So if any of the so this is the request coming from this client. If it is basically a locally distributed, each node is available in the ring, and the client can be connected to coordinator node. Coordinator node is actually the nearest node which is available to client IP. It tells the coordinator node to store the data. If I have defined a replication factor of 3, then it will basically keep a copy of 3 nodes, identify which 3 node has to keep the data. It will make a 3 copy of the data. Right. So it's locally distributed. If it is a rack aware Cassandra is a rack aware DB also. So in the previous one, any node is down, your copy of data is available in other nodes. So single node down also you can afford, right? Because it is the data is available in any of the nodes. If all the 3 nodes are down where the data is kept, then only you will not get the data. Otherwise you will get the data. So it is a rack aware also. You can define your physical racks, whatever in which racks the node is there. There's physical racks in the DC, so you can assign those physical racks in the Cassandra property file, and Cassandra becomes a rack aware at that time. And you can define the rack aware, so Cassandra will be available as rack aware. So if it will keep the data in different racks, not on the random node, it will always keep a data on the rack. If it's a picture of rack property, it will keep one data on rack 1, one data on rack 2, and one data on rack 3 in that manner. So any rack goes down, full rack goes down, even though Cassandra is highly available, because Cassandra is highly available by design. And it's also a DC aware. So if you have a multiple DC kind of architecture, like IDAM has a multi-DC architecture. The one DC is in Bangalore, one DC is in Nagpur, one DC is in Noida, and one DC is in Mumbai. So we have kept Cassandra as a DC based. So we have used network topology and replication factor and enable consistency, where the data is kept copied on a synchronous way to a different DC. So you can define a key space in a way so that it can keep a copy on accordingly on different DC also. So we have tunable consistency. It has tunable consistency, like you can define consistency levels like all, quorum, local quorum, 1. These are the basic consistency levels that the Cassandra has taken. Quorum is a 51% of replicas, but if you define a quorum consistency level, so 51% of your node will be able to answer. So it will take an acknowledgement from 51% of your node, whatever you define quorum. So, for example, if you have a replication factor of 5, the quorum is actually, if you define a quorum consistency level, it turns out to 5 divided by 2 plus 1, which is around 3. So it will keep your data in the 3 nodes. Local quorum 1 is only one replica it will keep, and all means it will keep a copy on all the nodes. So it's a tunable. So if you want 100% consistency, should be like it is not ACID compliant. So if you want 100 in your project, in your product, if you want 100% consistency, Cassandra is not a good choice, because you will suffer availability at the time. So if you know about the CAP theorem, consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, so Cassandra will value and adjust according to the CAP theorem. So if you need 100% consistency, availability will suffer. If you want a very low consistency, like only one copy of the data on one node, then you will be 100% available in nature. But yes, so keep it a balance, like 50% availability, 50% consistency, or more than that, like 80% consistency, but highly available in nature. So you can balance based on your requirements. So why we say Cassandra is very write efficient, and Cassandra writes it very fast and reads little bit slower than writes. So that's the internal read and write process of Cassandra, how it uses loop filter, mem table, SS table, index files. When it writes any data, reads any data. So whenever you wanted to write, for example, you wanted to write insert into table name, where columns like so 1, 2, 3, 4, you wanted to write that data. So Cassandra first write that data into internal mem table, which I just explained, like everything is dumped into the in-memory database. Once it is get pulled, it will get flushed into disk in the form of SS tables, loop filters, and index files to later on search. So it also write the data into the commit logs, which is an append-only logs. So in case of any crash scenario, like mem table got crashed, so it will pick the data from commit logs. Till the time it is not flushed into SS table, mem table, the commit log is there. Once the data is flushed into SS table, the commit log got cleaned automatically. This is the write process. In a read request form, like whenever the query comes to read any data in Cassandra, it will go to the read request, go to the blue filter, which I just explained. It's a probabilistic data structure, where it knows that which binary it will store in the binary format, and it knows it knows which node must have the data. It's not 100% sure. That is why I am always speaking it's a probabilistic data structure. So when you do a read request, it will go to the partition key cache. In partition key cache, it's a global partition key where all the primary keys are there. So with that, you know, okay, which node, which SS table has the data. So it goes directly to that node, find from the local index, okay, which SS tables are there, which is having the data. It will pick the data from that SS table, and whatever data available in mem table also search at the same time and return the request. So read has a little bit long path than write. That is why it is write efficient and not a read efficient. I just explained here a blue filter part also. Like whenever anything has to be searched, it just search in the blue filter first. It has 404. It will see a partition index. Okay, it may found 400 and it will do a local search, sequential scan, and you will get the data. So if Cassandra is always work on a last write wins policy, because whenever, say for example, you are writing some data or reading some data and any of the node goes down, then what it do basically, it stores the data for some time in the hints table. So Cassandra creates hints key space at that time and stores hints table at that time and stores the data for some time in the hints. Hence, it is when that node is up, it will come back to that node and distribute that data. So what we do, Cassandra, each and every data stored in Cassandra is time based. So it is, there is a time associated with each and every data. So what you do, if you wanted to read any data, it will search from various replicas of the Cassandra, do a read. If it finds a difference in the checksum, like because there is a time stored in each of the data, and if it fetches the time, okay, if Cassandra sees a time difference, then it runs a read repair internally to repair the data. It understands that okay, somewhere there is a problem, like somewhere maybe this node is down or it doesn't have the latest data, so it runs a read repair, keep the data, sync in all the replicas, and return the results. So it always like a last write wins policy. Last write win policy means it see the time who has written the latest records, keep that, take that record, put it in the other replicas, and return that in the result to the client. So this is how internal read and write works in Cassandra. Yeah. So as I just explained, like Cassandra data model, primary key, clustering key, and partitioning. Yeah, I just said it based on the Google Big Table. And it's a column-oriented database. It's a columnar database. It's a column store database where, for example, this is the table which is given in example. Like it is a primary key of having a team name or a player name. If you define a primary key like that, the team name becomes a partition key, and player name becomes a clustering key in the table. And clustering key is always used to order your data. So your data will be ordered by player name, but your data will be searched by team name always. So if you define at the first column here, so it becomes a partition key. And if you define another columns, which is a composite key in your RDBMS, if you define other composite keys here, yes, it acts as a primary record. It will be it should be unique in the table, but other keys will be used for a clustering keys in Cassandra, and it will be used for sorting your data. Say for example, this is the here. This is the table here, like team name, player name, and the third column is jersey. And how it's stored like that. If you have a team name, then all the team names become the partition. So team name Springers, Smitely Mertz, and Peppers becomes a partition key here. And rest all columns are associated as a column into and ordered by a player name. So player name for Springers is Elder, Belanger, and Footy. So they basically associated with ordered like A, B, and F, and associated the other columns in the same column family. So that is why it is a column oriented, and all the other columns are clustered. Are basically ordered. So in this diagram, in the previous way also I explained that the partitioner like murmur3 partitioner internally to store the data into Cassandra ring, and it uses a consistent hashing to find which node to store the data. So whenever you wanted to write any data from a client, the partitioner find out okay the hash value of the data. Thus the key is associated with the hash function. Hash function gives a value, and this value is copied. For example, the hash value here is 15. So it finds okay which is the nearest node for 15. It gives to the coordinator node. Coordinator node is the nearest to the application always. 100 is the coordinator node. 100 node sees okay hash value 15 fits into the 20 node because 20 node is nearest. So it will store 10 to 20. It will keep a copy of in the 20 node because of the token partitioning done, and it will store the copy. And the replication of factor of 3, so it will keep a 3 copy of 3 nodes different. In that way, you will always get a data in Cassandra. Right? Yeah. So I have enough explained like what are the common most important terminologies in Cassandra. Now I just wanted to tell if you are using Cassandra, what are the common mistakes you do in Cassandra in any of the development environment and production environments. These are common practices which we have worked on heavily. I just wanted to get directly to you so that you can think of these things. So don't think like if you have a lot of data, Cassandra will work for you. No, it's not like that. So you have to see the queries, you have to see the data model. If it is best fitted for you, you can use it. Cassandra is highly dependent on the way you design your data model and design your business. Don't ever think of external load balancing with Cassandra. If you have a 18 node cluster, 10 node cluster, don't use external load balancer to it. Because it becomes a single point of failure, and Cassandra client drivers, it's very good to apply a client-side load balancing, so you don't need any external load balancing. As I said that Cassandra stores each data associated time, so incorrect server timings will give you a wrong record. So your server should always be synced with NTP server timings. So your server should be have a proper timing associated with the data. Incorrect server times will give you a wrong data because it has to be fair all the time. Whenever there is an incorrect server timing, Cassandra would not able to understand, okay, which data is the latest and which data is not latest. You always internally try to run repairs and then gives a wrong result. So server timings are very much important. Tombstone hell, like Cassandra is very bad in Tombstone. Like if you are deleting a lot of records and if you are keeping Tombstone with Cassandra, so Cassandra keep that records in Tombstone for some time, which you define in the configuration. There is a GC grace second key, which is where you define how much time you wanted to keep the deleted data. So that becomes a Tombstone for Cassandra. But if you are deleting a lot in Cassandra, if your delete request is coming a lot in your database, then I would suggest reduce the Tombstone time because it will impact your performance when there is a lot amount of Tombstone available in the database. So I just recommend that keep your Tombstone time very less if you have a lot of deletes. There is a concept called snitch. You should use snitch in production always because snitch determines which data center and tracks you belongs to. So it has to be used. Don't ever think of that Cassandra version should always be same in all the node cluster. If you have any version mismatch in Cassandra in the cluster, Cassandra SS table format version will get changed and you will always suffer with problems. You will not get the correct data. In Geo, we have a practice that we have EBS, SAN, NAS, we can store data inside that. So never Cassandra doesn't recommend that you should store a shared storage. You can never use a shared storage in Cassandra. Always use a local storage, disk storage. So it will once you migrate any of the RDBMS to Cassandra, you will save a lot of hardware cost also because it always resides on a local storage and best performance is always gives on a local storage. So avoid using EBS, SAN, NAS, anything. Compactions are basically is a terminology where you wanted to merge your SS tables. If there is a lot of because SS tables are immutable in nature, whenever the mem tables is small enough, it will eventually flush faster in the disk and it creates a lot of SS tables. So keep your mem table also a good enough of size. So if you keep your tables in memory, once it is flushed, it will keep lesser SS tables. And to merge these SS tables, there is a compaction strategies available in Cassandra where you can do compaction. So compaction is also important. There are two algorithms, mainly level tiered, size tiered in Cassandra where you can do a compaction. Best suited algorithm you can choose. So always use in production these tools which is available like IOStat, HTOP, VMstat for virtual memory, Flow2, TPstats. These are good tools to work on for Cassandra in any of the environments to see how Cassandra is internally working. Always use a G1GC garbage collector. There are various garbage collector algorithms, like those people who are working on Java knows about that. There are various Java garbage collectors. G1GC is the best one, and always use G1GC in production. Otherwise, other garbage collectors are like stop the world scenario, where the application threads are stopped based on when the garbage collector thread is executing. So never use other garbage collectors because it will hamper performance. Always use G1GC. Right? And always try to do a performance testing on the same hardware which is available in production. If you do a performance on different hardware, you will get a different results and it may impact in production when you live in Cassandra. Right. So I just wanted to tell you that I just explained like secondary indexes. So don't think that we have the data so we can query it. Like if you have, I just explained like if you have a table of 10 columns and where you search based on 5 columns. So if, say for example you have a person table and where you wanted to search a record based on city. So what is the query would be select extract from table name select testing from person where city equal to Mumbai and city is not the partition key. At the time, what you thought you wanted to execute your such type of query in your project. So what you will do, you will create a secondary index on the city, because if you don't execute a secondary index, Cassandra will tell that because I cannot filter those records because these are not indexed. So Cassandra will tell that okay, either use a allow filtering in that query. So it is very dangerous and never use allow filtering. And if you have used allow filtering, so it will basically filter those records, but it is very slow. So it recommends that okay, at that time you use a second indexes. So you deploy your code by creating a second indexes of city equal to Mumbai. On a city column, you create a second indexer and deploy it in production. And one fine day, see there is a offer going on by Jio in Mumbai. So at that time you have a 3-node cluster and you will see a huge load is coming because Jio has something given an offer in Mumbai. You wanted to get all the records from Mumbai and wanted to update those records. So at that time, if you run that query, it is hampering the performance not good. At that time, you decide, okay, I need to increase now nodes. So because it's a linearly scalable, you will add more nodes to it. And as soon as you add more nodes to it, the performance becomes degrades because you have used secondary indexes. And I said that secondary indexes is always local in Cassandra. So how it will execute? It will basically go on each of the node to find city equal to Mumbai, take all the records, merge it, and then gives a result to the caller. So it is very bad execution. Never use secondary indexes in production. So always try to use a partition key. If you have a city as a Mumbai as a search criteria, make it a part of your partition key. Make it a part of your component key and should be available for either as an ordinary columns or as a partition key in the Cassandra. So it's very bad if you have used secondary indexes. Allow filtering never used in your production. If you have used, it will give you a very bad result. So that is the things why Cassandra fails because of these things. Materialized use you should not use anywhere in the production. Because whenever the new item is written, has to be right in the view, so never use materialized views also. SASE index is a secondary index associated with SS tables that is also should not be used because of the performance. So if you have not used these terminologies and you have defined your queries data model in a proper way, Cassandra is the best fit for you, and it will give you a performance boost with less hardware, less storage, and high transactions per second. So this is just a few comparisons which I have done for all of the databases where the Cassandra and Couchbase, CouchDB, Mongo, and all the modern Aerospike. So I think its time is over. I have covered a lot of the things related to the things which I wanted to present in the tech talk about the Cassandra, about the data migration, and the best practices about the CI/CD thing. So I think I am done from this tech talk. Yeah, Bhavini, I think I have done. Anybody has any questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions in the question tab. If you can click and write it.
So in the new section, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Saurabh Sharma has asked what is this IDAM automation UI? Is this developed internally by our organization? Yes, Saurabh. IDAM automation UI is developed by us. We have developed this to see the progress of our CI/CD pipeline. So in the daily morning, we take a practice of using CI/CD, and we follow 100% CI/CD in our teams. Right. So Eknath has asked, is this specific to test factory environment? No. So okay. So Eknath has, I think, submitted the question. He has asked, can we use this in production environment for monitoring purpose in GraphDB? Which you wanted to use? Automation UI? Eknath? So if it is an automation UI, yes, we can use it. But right now in Jio, production environment is as I explained, continuous deployment is not happening in production. So if that Jio do a production environment deployment in production environment, yes, we can use automation UI and monitoring in any of the DBs. Like it's not related to GraphDB or Keystore or columnar database. So it can be available for all the DB. Is IDAM automation, Saurabh asked, is IDAM automation dashboard only for reports? IDAM automation is for CI/CD. Whatever is the executed is available. Okay. How data is replicated across nodes? So data is replicated across nodes using replication factor. Whatever you have defined a replication factor, it will keep a copy on all the nodes. Jyotsa has asked, can we get a recording of this session? Yes, I think very well you can get. Anonymous, Cassandra seems like really cool in terms of its capabilities. Can it be used to provide a single platform for database for any application as well as big data lake as opposed to a traditional database and Hadoop for data lake? If Cassandra is capable of handling both the tasks, kindly discuss pros and cons of such a system. So I think I have well explained like what is the core capabilities of Cassandra. Now you guys can look at your database and see, okay, these are the things if that is that you can able to. So I have discussed that why we have used, these are the core things. If you answer those questions and if you see all the things available in those and if your database suffice those, you can very well use that Cassandra. Rajiv Kar has asked, could you please suggest any tool for continuous testing? So continuous testing, we have used testing like because we have used Node.js, so we have used Supertest for developer have used Supertest, and JMeter for heavily used. We have JMeter for performance testing and functional testing. Yes, we can use JMeter or Supertest or any other tool. If it is Java, then you can use JMeter itself. Ravi Kurana, how many maximum and minimum Cassandra nodes can be enabled at a time of having high availability? So it is not defined because Cassandra doesn't bother like how many nodes you wanted to define because it's a linearly scalable database. So you can define as many as based on your, if you have designed your queries well, design your data model in a proper way, you can define as many as nodes. Like if you see a Netflix, it has 2,400 nodes in production. So it is based on your load. But yes, you can define it. I mean, there is no problem with defining as many as nodes. But you need to define. But if you have used secondary indexes, I said in the session, if you have used secondary indexes in your table, and if you want to grow your nodes whenever you want to do, your performance will degrade because of the secondary indexes. If you have queries are only on the partition keys, you can increase based on the load. Eknath, I have already used project. Okay. How do we invoke InfoSec team into CI/CD? How do we involve InfoSec team into CI/CD? So I think if you have some development also in the so I didn't get like InfoSec team should review the CI/CD process, or InfoSec team also wants to work on CI/CD. So Saurabh, if you are listening, Bhavni, can you unmute Saurabh Sharma?
No, he'll have to write it in the questions itself.
Okay. Yeah, I think I have covered all the questions. Yeah, Bhavni, I think there is no more questions left.
We have 2 more questions, I think, and then we can close.
IDAM automation more like a technical reporting rather than being equal to Jenkins. No, it gives a Jenkins. So Jenkins is a build tool. It's not a Jenkins. You will not get Jenkins reports. It's a reporting for us to see. Okay, everything is working fine. Like we have integrated with performance test results. So that Jenkins is a build tool for continuous integration and deployment. But automation UI is custom tool which we made it for reporting purpose.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sanjay. Thank you everyone for joining. It was a pretty engaging session. We'll see you next Friday. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone.